The construction workers called him Gramps. He sat in the security trailer, logged visitors, did his rounds with a flashlight that had seen better days. Another retiree trying to stay useful. Until catastrophic foundation failure put hundreds of lives at risk, and the elderly security guard turned out to be the architect who'd built the city around them. Arthur William Morrison was 74 years old, with snow-white hair that never seemed to stay combed and wire-rimmed glasses held together with electrical tape. He wore the same navy blue security uniform every night, carried the same dented thermos filled with black coffee, and walked his rounds with the careful shuffle of a man whose knees had accumulated 7 decades of wear. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we continue this powerful tale of hidden expertise and life-saving knowledge, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories about invisible guardians deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. The Millennium Tower construction site occupied an entire city block in downtown Chicago, a gleaming testament to architectural ambition rising 42 stories into the sky. When completed, it would house luxury condominiums, high-end retail, and office space for Fortune 500 companies. At night, Arthur Morrison was its solitary guardian. He'd taken the security job 6 years ago, not long after his wife Eleanor passed and the silence in their North Side apartment became unbearable. The work wasn't demanding. Check contractor IDs during shift changes, monitor the gate after hours, walk the perimeter every 2 hours, file reports that supervisors barely read. The construction crews treated him with the casual kindness reserved for harmless elderly people. They'd nod when passing his trailer, occasionally share coffee during break times, and joke about Gramps keeping the site safe from teenage vandals and copper thieves. What they didn't know was that Arthur Morrison had designed half the buildings they could see from the construction elevator. His small apartment was a museum of architectural achievement disguised as modest retirement living. The walls displayed framed sketches of Chicago's skyline from the 1970s and 80s, when Arthur Morrison and Associates had been one of the most respected architectural firms in the Midwest. Awards from the American Institute of Architects, photographs of ribbon-cutting ceremonies, newspaper articles about innovative building techniques. Arthur Morrison, FAIA, Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. 46 years designing everything from suburban shopping centers to downtown skyscrapers. His firm had created the blueprints for buildings that housed millions of people, conducted billions of dollars in business, and defined the visual character of the Chicago skyline. The career had ended gradually rather than dramatically. Clients began favoring younger architects with flashier computer-aided design systems. The firm's partners aged out or retired. By 2015, Arthur Morrison and Associates had quietly dissolved, its founder transitioning into emeritus status with a pension and a lifetime of achievement nobody seemed interested in remembering. But architectural knowledge doesn't retire. Understanding how buildings stand, how they distribute weight, how they respond to stress, these insights become part of a person's fundamental way of seeing the world. Arthur couldn't look at any structure without mentally calculating load-bearing requirements, foundation specifications, and potential failure points, which is why he'd been increasingly concerned about the Millennium Tower project. The construction had proceeded quickly, perhaps too quickly. Arthur watched from his security trailer as crews poured concrete, installed steel framework, and raised floor after floor with impressive efficiency. But certain details troubled him. Corners being cut in foundation preparation, materials that didn't quite match specification requirements, construction techniques that prioritize speed over structural integrity. He'd mentioned his concerns to the site foreman, but what did a night security guard know about engineering? His observations were politely dismissed, filed away with other minor workplace complaints. Arthur had considered reaching out to city building inspectors, but without official credentials, who would listen to the observations of an elderly man whose architectural license had lapsed years ago? He was just the night watchman now, invisible and irrelevant. Tuesday, October 15th, started like any other shift. Arthur arrived at 10:45 p.m., relieved the evening security guard, and settled into his routine. The weather was unseasonably warm for October, with humidity that made his arthritis ache, and storm clouds building on the horizon. Construction had reached the 38th floor, with crews working double shifts to meet aggressive completion deadlines. Even at night, the building hummed with activity. Elevators carrying materials, generators powering floodlights, the constant background noise of a project that never slept. Around 2:30 a.m., Arthur felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. A subtle vibration in the trailer floor, like the rumble of a distant train. But there were no train tracks within 6 blocks of the construction site.
Arthur stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and looked up at the Millennium Tower. 42 stories of steel and concrete rising into the cloudy night sky. Everything appeared normal. But the vibration continued, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat, emanating from somewhere deep beneath the building. Arthur had felt that vibration before, decades ago, during the construction of the Hancock Center, when unexpected settling had required emergency foundation reinforcement. It was the signature of structural stress, of a building fighting against forces it wasn't designed to handle. He walked to the main construction entrance, used his security key to access the site, and descended to the sub-basement, where the foundation systems were located. The vibration was stronger here, accompanied by sounds that made his architectural training scream warnings. The subtle groaning of steel under excessive load, the whisper of concrete developing microfractures. Arthur aimed his flashlight at the main foundation support pillars. What he saw made his blood run cold. Hairline cracks were developing in the concrete, following stress patterns that indicated the building's weight was being distributed unevenly. The foundation was failing, slowly but inevitably, compromised by the same construction shortcuts he'd been observing for months. Arthur Morrison had designed enough buildings to know exactly what this meant. The Millennium Tower had approximately 6 to 8 hours before catastrophic structural failure would bring 42 stories crashing down into the Chicago streets below. And there were still over 200 construction workers inside. Arthur climbed back to ground level, his 74-year-old legs moving faster than they had in years. He needed to contact someone with authority, someone who could order an immediate evacuation and emergency structural assessment. But at 2:47 a.m., who would believe a night security guard claiming that a 42-story building was about to collapse? Arthur returned to his trailer, pulled out the emergency contact list, and began making phone calls. Site supervisor? Voicemail. Construction foreman? No answer. Building department emergency line? Transferred 3 times before reaching someone who promised to look into it during normal business hours. Time was running out, and Arthur Morrison faced a choice that would define the rest of his life. He could follow protocol, file an incident report, hope someone in authority would take his concerns seriously, and pray that bureaucratic processes would move fast enough to prevent disaster. Or he could do what he'd been trained to do for 46 years, take responsibility for the safety of everyone who would be affected by his buildings. Arthur Morrison, FAIA, made his decision in less than 30 seconds. He walked to the main construction entrance, used his security access to activate the building's emergency PA system, and began the most important announcement of his architectural career. Attention all personnel. This is Arthur Morrison, Building Security. I am ordering immediate evacuation of the Millennium Tower construction site due to critical structural failure in the foundation system. This is not a drill. Foundation pillars are showing stress fractures consistent with imminent collapse. All personnel must evacuate immediately using emergency procedures. Within minutes, construction workers began streaming out of the building. Many looked confused. Evacuation orders usually came from foremen or supervisors, not night security guards. But something in Arthur's voice, the technical language he used, the absolute certainty in his tone, convinced them to take his warning seriously. The site foreman, Marcus Rodriguez, approached Arthur's trailer 20 minutes later. "Morrison, what the hell are you doing? You can't just evacuate an entire construction site because you heard some weird noise." Arthur looked at him calmly, no longer just the harmless old security guard. "My name is Arthur Morrison. I'm a licensed architect with 46 years of experience in structural engineering. I designed the Millennium Financial Center 3 blocks east of here, the Roosevelt Tower downtown, and approximately 30 other buildings in the Chicago metropolitan area." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "The foundation support system is failing due to inadequate concrete curing time, substandard aggregate materials, and improper load distribution. This building has approximately 4 hours before catastrophic collapse. You need to contact structural engineers immediately." "That's impossible. You're just the security—" He handed him a business card, yellowed with age but still legible. "Arthur Morrison, FAIA, Principal Architect, Morrison & Associates. I've been watching this construction for 6 years, Marcus. I've seen every shortcut, every compromise, every decision that prioritized schedule over safety. And now the building is telling us that those decisions have consequences." Marcus looked at the card, then at Arthur, then at the 200 construction workers milling around in the parking lot. "If you're wrong about this, if I'm wrong, you'll have lost 8 hours of construction time and some overtime pay. If I'm right, you'll have saved 200 lives and prevented the worst construction disaster in Chicago history." At 6:15 a.m., emergency structural engineers arrived and confirmed what Arthur had diagnosed 4 hours earlier. The Millennium Tower's foundation was indeed failing, compromised by exactly the construction deficiencies he'd identified. Emergency demolition teams spent the next 6 days bringing down the building in controlled sections before uncontrolled collapse could endanger the surrounding neighborhood. The story made national news. Retired architect prevents building collapse. But Arthur Morrison didn't give interviews or appear on television. He simply returned to his security trailer the next night, put on his worn uniform, and resumed his rounds. Because some people don't seek recognition for doing what they've always done, protecting the people who live and work inside the buildings they create. Marcus Rodriguez visited Arthur's trailer the following week. "Morrison, I owe you an apology, and probably my life." Arthur looked up from his incident report, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Just doing my job, Marcus, all of it. Designing buildings, making sure they stay standing, keeping the people inside them safe." "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" Arthur glanced around the construction site at the empty space where the Millennium Tower had briefly stood. "Because the buildings don't care about titles or credentials. They only care about physics, engineering, and whether the people responsible for them understand what they're doing." Arthur Morrison continued working security for 2 more years before finally retiring at 76. The construction industry in Chicago quietly made sure he never lacked for consulting opportunities, though he rarely accepted them. But sometimes, late at night, when new construction projects were breaking ground, an elderly man with snow-white hair and wire-rimmed glasses could be seen walking the perimeter, flashlight in hand, watching over buildings that other people were creating. Because architecture isn't just about designing structures. It's about taking lifetime responsibility for every person who will ever trust their safety to the decisions you make. And some responsibilities never end, even when the blueprints are signed by someone else.